Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my proud privilege to welcome Professor Jagannath to CENJOWS. Today, he'll be covering a very interesting subject for all of us. Basically, what is happening in Europe, the relevance of NATO, and how does it affect the geopolitics in case NATO expands or is not allowed to expand, and what are the dynamics involved with it. To take on the subject, I'll first request Ms. Anshika to introduce the professor, and thereafter I'll request the professor to deliberate on the subject.
Thank you, sir. Dr. J Jeganaathan is currently serving as an Associate Professor of European Studies at the School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi. His research expertise spans post-Cold War European politics and security, NATO strategic affairs, and broader international relations from a non-European perspective. He has also previously served as Assistant Professor and Head of Department of National Security Studies at the Central University of Jammu from 2013 to 2023, contributing significantly to academic and strategic discourse in a highly sensitive region. Dr. Jeganaathan is a member of the Academic Council of the National Defense Academy, Khadakwasla, and regularly delivers lectures at the Army War College while also mentoring research at the National Defense College, New Delhi. With extensive experience in Track 2 dialogues, international strategic engagements, and fellowships across institutions in Germany, Belgium, China, and beyond, he brings a rare blend of academic depth and policy relevance. We are privileged to have him with us today to share his insights and deliver the important lecture. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the CENJOWS for this opportunity to share my ideas on the topic of this topic on European security. Let me begin with saying, maybe a decade ago, it would be irrelevant to. It would have been irrelevant to speak on the European security and NATO expansion. I remember as a student of Center for European Studies in School of International Studies, I was so fascinated about. This is about 2006, after the NATO's first post-Cold War, the second post-Cold War expansion in 2004, with the Baltic states joining NATO. So I was wondering that what kind of impact is going to happen on this European security architecture. So the studying European security architecture was so it's not relevant to even the European security experts at that time. They were very fascinated about the concept of interdependence, and the European Union would take care of their security. So there's no way, there's no possibility to that the traditional conventional war would be back into Europe. So this is sort of I would say, the romantic ideas they used to have. So my thesis explored on this NATO expansion, how it has shaping the dynamics of European security, because I could not assess the impact on the European security architecture at that time. So I kept it like the European security dynamics. So it is actually analyzing the various aspects from the European member countries or the European allies of the NATO, and also the analyzing the transatlantic relationship, which is also largely been ignored by the IR scholars, especially post-Cold War period, where most of the focus of the IR scholarship is looking towards, especially the international security scholarship, is towards the Middle East and Europe. So in today's presentation, I have divided my presentation into four broad themes that reflects the title. First, I would like to focus on the European security in the contemporary. So how you characterize the contemporary European security architecture. The second aspect, I will be discussing about the NATO expansion, very briefly about the historical, the rationale for NATO expansion. Why did the European states want to expand NATO? What was the rationale behind the expansion? And what was the reaction at that time by the Russia? In fact, that we all know that NATO was against the Soviet threat. This is post-Cold War scenario. The third, I have identified few fault lines that these are the emerging fault lines that contemporary European security architecture, within the contemporary European architecture, and how the Europeans are going to address these fault lines. The last, what are the options that European countries have? So this is I have structured the presentation today. So if you look at the contemporary European security architecture, the contemporary era I have, for me, it's like the post 2021, the COVID era. In fact, the post Russia-Ukraine war. My analysis on that. So on this architecture, because I don't want to go back historically, then it is like a long history of studying the European security architecture from the post World War II, from the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, then the NATO, and during the Cold War period, that has also tremendously shaped the European security architecture, role of institutions like European Union and other regional institutions, then the national efforts by respective member countries, all collectively contributed to shaping this European security architecture, aiming to prevent any future wars, like big wars, like World War type of wars, and also sort of preserve the European security and economic prosperity. So they heavily relied on the institutional structures that they have gradually built over the period, over the decades, almost for the 50, 60 years, decades, keeping the NATO, the commitment, the Atlantic commitment, which is provided as a security framework uh, for the process to parallel process to continue. So there are two broader um, the contours. I would say that the current contemporary European security is now, to me, it's my analysis. One is the unexpected, the hostile environment in the Europe that the European security architecture or the European security is facing today. With the unprovoked Russia's aggression in Ukraine, it's a classic case which the Europeans never have anticipated or never even have imagined or foresaw in the last ever since the World War II. There was a lot of institutional mechanism with Russia. Time and again, they have assured Russia of. There was a dialogue with Russia, including the NATO had a dialogue with Russia under the Partnership for Peace. There are also dialogue mechanism with the European Union. Then this is all multilateral level, this institutional level. However, also there are a lot of bilateral mechanism which would assure Russia of non-aggression or non-provocation of Russia's interest or Russia's sphere of influence in the Eastern Europe. So this is Russia was in fact in the post-Cold War when the Cold War ended was assured that there would be any military threat. NATO will not pose any military threat to Russia's territorial integrity and their national security. So all of a sudden while Russia's unprovoked Ukraine has sort of created the change this environment in the last 3 years. We can see, although they were not predicted about what kind of the waves that it has created. The second is the hybrid nature of the threat perception and towards Russia has changed. And also the nature of threat was also is totally new to the European, especially the military structure, the European security architecture. So far, they have been focusing on the non-traditional security aspects like climate security, migration is also a security, maritime security, they have piracies also, and cyber crime, all sort of non-traditional but non-pure traditional military security threat, like that sort of how the Russia is. That it doesn't mean that Russia has posed a direct military threat to Europe. Till now, the Putin has never ever mentioned that any of these European countries has a military threat. The military expedition, I mean, the invasion started in Ukraine. It is an invasion, is a military invasion, classic military invasion, I would say, where you mobilize a troop against a sovereign state, Ukraine, which was recognized, which we never anticipated. And the kind of battle they're fighting is as similar to the World War II battles. The trench warfare is a comeback, which we never anticipated there would be a trench warfare. Of course, the technology is being used, but that's more of a sort of an enabling for the land forces to maneuver and gain some tangible, objectives in the battlefield. So so this is the threat is not against any of these European countries or against the European Union as such or Europe as such, but specifically targeted at the NATO expansion, especially to Ukraine. And this is the Putin's new doctrine, I would say. In my thesis, also I mentioned in way back in 2011, I wrote the thesis that there will be a provocation in Ukraine and Georgia, and it happened in 2014, where the Georgia crisis and the Crimea crisis happened in 2014 and 15 subsequently. That's sort of they say it's a provocation, but it is a sort of a message that Russia would not tolerate any sort of military posturing which deters its sphere of influence, especially in the eastwards. And where do they get this strong conviction that Russia's strategic thinkers or the planners, planners? That's from the NATO's bombing in Yugoslavia in late 90s. And that is actually the Russian, Putin came later, and Helsin and all, they felt that the West has betrayed us. They moved away from promises, although they were sort of pact to assure Russia. But to bombing in Kosovo and especially in Yugoslavia crisis, it is actually battle Russian strategy thinkers that it will undermine its strategic influence in the Eastern theater. Then the uncertainties in transatlantic alliances over the last 3 years, which is actually the question about the NATO's relevance and the role in the post-Cold War period. And we have seen that the NATO has been shifted out of Euro operations in Afghanistan in 2001, where the George Bush, then president, has invoked this Article 5 for the first time ever since the NATO was created. An attack on an ally is considered as an attack on others. And at that time, I think this sort of a disagreement and within the alliance started brewing from that time, that some of the allies wanted to. So I categorize these two into two broad categories. One is the Atlantist, which is strongly believed that NATO's role is indispensable for the European security. And there are Europeanists. They say no, we can't rely totally on the NATO or NATO security guarantee, where we have to strengthen our own framework, the European Union framework, and maybe in the future even for an European independent European army. So this is a debate and a sort of parallel thing that's happening between the Europe. So Trump has brought it more to the fore. This what the undercurrents which we have to delineate, where a lot of research and all. So Trump has overnight brought to the fore that there is a crack within the Atlantic alliances, and this is also visible in if you go back and see that in when they wanted to take NATO forces to Iraq in 2003 against the WMD weapons in Iraq. In Iraq also we have seen this. The France and Germany had a different agreements, but yet they went with the the American leadership, because the US is the leadership, playing military leadership in the NATO. So that we will be discussing later on. So these three things, that the hybrid warfare and the hostile environment created by Russia's aggression and uncertainty in transatlantic. These three things characterize the contemporary European security structure. And this actually the push to trigger, sort of a driving factor for the European nest, I would say, to look for the strategic autonomy. That's sort of a goal for all the European countries. So this is a map which depicts that how complex the interactions of different institutions in the European security architecture, which has been some of them are overlapping with in terms of role and functions. Some of them are complementing. There's no contradiction so far between the NATO or any of these organizations. For instance, the members of European Union are also members of the NATO, and some of the members of the NATO may not be member of the European Union. Some of the European Union members may not be the member of the NATO members. So it's a more of overlapping factors within the European region, and there are a lot of external factors. Like I said, that China is growing role in the last 2 decades. That is also sort of and US increased role in Europe in the last 15 years has sort of created both sides the strategic, I would say, the pressure, in which the Europeans are struggling to cope with whether to build their own independent framework or to cope with the existing framework. The one thing, from theoretically speaking, that whenever there is a superpower, a great power or superpower rivalry happen, and it is Europe gets affected. So during the Cold War period, there was a standoff between the US Soviet Union and the US. Again, this is sort of a great power rivalry, and the Europe gets lived under the fear of the catastrophe. Although it is not happening, but there was a constant fear in which they built the European leaders at that time. Even Germany played a crucial leadership role. France played a role. In fact, Charles de Gaulle came out of NATO in 1960s. That's due to the disagreement with the US. So the old European members of the members, of course, they would call them as a West European members rather than the old European members. Um, so if you see the threat perception, it varies between the old Europe and the new Europe. Where the new Europe, Russia is a strong threat to the national security. The marked in the orange color depicts that these countries, whereas the Western European countries are the old European countries, they don't see the Russia as an immediate or imminent threat to their security. Rather, there were other non-traditional security challenges. So there's differences in terms of threat perceptions that vary from the old Europe to new Europe, and that is also sort of affected the decision-making process when it comes to NATO decision-making process. There's a pull and push factor by these two European allies. So our European allies is not in a solitary alliance. There's lack of leadership as well. So all started with the NATO expansion. As you see that these are the NATO member countries. The first post-Cold War expansion happened when Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary joined NATO in 1990s. At that time, the NATO, the US Secretary, I forgot his name, he has assured Russia, but it's a verbal assurance. It's not like a real assurance that there won't be any forward expansion which would affect Russia's strategic influence, sphere of influence, particularly the Ukraine or Belarus and in the other Baltic side. And so that is sort of a verbal assurance given to the Russia. Then the 1999 is a critical point where actually the Russia started feeling that we've been betrayed, and that is also coincidence with the the entry of Putin as a president, taking over the mantle of the Russian president. Since then, he's been a president of Russia. It's almost been more than 25 years. So Putin is the Russian president, and he's strongly believed as being an agent, earlier, witness to all these things. Sense of betrayal that the country has been betrayed and NATO is expanding. So let's not be sanguine about what the promises by the Western countries, especially the US-led infrastructure in the NATO structure. So in 2004, and this is the reason which is also I find fascinating, that when I was a student of European studies in 2004, while I was completing my MPhil in 2006, I got fascinated that is the Baltic states joining NATO, because that's where the Russia actually shares borders with NATO countries. So like today, the Finland and Sweden joined NATO. It's become a very important and interesting factor. So that draw my attention to focus on to study about the European security architecture. It's not like what we've been taught and we've been seen in the media and the other scholars, normal body of literature, that Europe is building its own the post-World War liberal democratic international order where it focuses on the market and mobility and globalization. So there's no geopolitics. It's more of a globalization playing a undercurrent. And you also it is also empirically true that if you have seen how Germany has built interdependence with Russia, the Russian oil companies and the gas companies. So Russia became emerged as the critical supplier of energy to the European countries, especially the Western European countries. So why NATO expansion? I mean, the rationale to expand NATO. To me, this is what my perception. For me, that the creation of NATO, it's not. Maybe it is a stated that it is to provide sort of security guarantee to the European countries, which were at that time post World War II, that they were rebuilding, reconstructing the Europe, and involved, and most of the economies were completely ruined by the effect of the World War II. So the NATO would take care of the security because they were not able to spend for the defense and the security. But what I see is the other way, different thing. There is a sort of a vested interest that the NATO is a sort of a security framework which is being projected by the US to safeguard the investments of the US companies, the post-war involved in the reconstruction of Europe. This is what I see, that how you guarantee those investments in terms of preventing any sort of aggression from the USSR. So from the literature, it shows that it is not the first time that Russians felt that they've been betrayed by the West. Even the Stalin also felt they were betrayed by the Roosevelt and Churchill in the Potsdam conferences. What happened in the discussion of the Potsdam conferences, and even the public opinion at that time. If you read from the literature, they say that how the Russia Red Army had made a huge sacrifice in liberating Europe. But in the public view and even the popular culture, we see it is the US forces have liberated Europe from the Nazis' rule. And we were being not told about the narratives, the certain narratives about how the Red Army has sacrificed in terms of pushing the Nazis out. Had not been Red Army, the war would have been continued for some more time. So this is the Russians' perspective. If we interact with Russian scholars and war historians, they share this view. So the first and foremost is there's a demand from the Central and Eastern European states, especially the Poland and all, and at that time, 90s, after the Cold War ended, the completely Russia is sort of recovering from the collapse of the Soviet states. So they wanted to have some sort of a guarantee. They look towards the West, and the West had NATO. And the fear of Russia's resurgence maybe have that similar territorial ambitions to regain those territories. The second is to make the Germany the Germany was unified, West Germany and East Germany, to be in a stable Europe, and also provide a permanent space for the US strategic interest, and to maintain its influence in Europe, and make US as a indispensable external factor of European stability or security and stability, the regional security and stability. And NATO provides a platform. As I said that before, that this is Russia's how Russia felt that they have been betrayed. That James Baker, the Secretary of State, has I quote that if you maintain a presence in Germany, there would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction for forces of NATO 1 inch to the east, because you cannot expand. So he has assured Gorbachev in 90s that we will not extend the NATO towards east. So this is the Russia. See how Russia viewed the Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia Republic joining NATO is a stab in the back, and this is like the promise they made. These are oral promises, and they have betrayed us. So, and Yeltsin called, Boris Yeltsin in 1997, he called is a mistake and reducing mutual trust, prompting inward reorientation and opposition. The confrontation is official policy. Now you see the transition from the Boris Yeltsin to Vladimir Putin, and Putin is different from the Yeltsin. And if you want to know more about this, I would recommend read the Foundation of Geopolitics, a book written by Alexander Dugin. Now he's very popular. His book was banned, and the book was also written in 1997. So 1997, within the Russian strategy community, it is a turning moment, intellectuals and also the thinkers, the military thinkers and strategy thinkers. And this Alexander's book on the Foundation of Geopolitics also fueled. That's why this book was banned in Europe. You wouldn't get it this because it talks about the very realistic, the classic realistic sense that about the war and geopolitics, and that's the reason, precisely the reason that even till I remember when went for my PhD research in Brussels and Europe, there were no takers for my argument when I say about this the realistic view. They say you're stuck in the geopolitics. It's a old school of thought, and there are things have moved. That's the end of history. So there is now new liberal order. So there won't be any future war like what we have been discussing in the classic geopolitics, like Wegener theory or Nicholas Spikeman. So the relations further deteriorated badly when the Yugoslavia airstrike happened. This I mentioned the things where Russia felt that they have been humiliated, and that eroded this post-Cold War optimism that Europe will be descended into a perpetual peace, given the fact that they have carefully built this European Union framework, which would stabilize their market and unify the markets and also facilitate the mobility of goods and people within the Europe. So that's one of the optimism that they had. The Russia also this expansion that Russia felt that is also embedded in the NATO's in Russia's security doctrine. I remember I have analyzed the security doctrine at the chosen time. My period was like 2004 to 1990 to 2004. That was my assessment research period I have taken. So I assessed the security document, most of them Russians. So I got help from some of the Russian friends to translate, give it. Those days no AI, so I got it something translated through my Russian friends in JNU language studies. It is very strong about the NATO expansion. Maybe we did not give enough attention to read these papers. And it was not even discussed in any of these European think tanks at the time. So now coming to the emerging fault lines, there are three fault lines which I see coming from this the contemporary European security architecture. The first one is there is a clear-cut divide between the East and West over Russia. And this division is very strong and very visible. It's no longer, and thanks to Trump, diplomacy is always to, even if there is a disagreement and differences, they have to cover, not to be in the public domain, but he's very blunt and bold and bringing these fissures and the cracks within the system. I don't know, it could be a part of his strategy to embarrass the European allies of NATO. This division is very strong. It's no longer between the Europeans and Atlantists. And this is also within the European allies, there's a huge difference, divide when it comes to Russia. So, and that is reflecting in the public opinion survey conducted by some of the organizations in the last 4 years, where you can see the public perception about towards Russia is a military threat, or whether we can have a dialogue with Russia, or what will be the future. There's a huge differences from the public expression and public sentiments and public view as well. And there is also sort of a sense of feeling that the post-Brexit, when Britain exit from European Union, and there was sort of popular perception, and also the perception within the Russia also, they felt that it is like the Britain has exited from the entire Europe, which is not the case. Britain exited from the European Union framework. It's a economic and trade framework, but it's still is part of NATO member. But I see it has undermined the European efforts to build its own independent the security and defense framework for the European security architecture, it is one of the nuclear weapon state besides France in the European Union. So they were still more powerful. So they don't have that stability has been given. Now the France is the sole nuclear weapon state in the European Union. If at all the European Union, the current president Ursula von der Leyen also highlighted that we wanted to build. This is like that their pursuit of strategic autonomy. So the Brexit has undermined that effort in a way. Not slow. It's not undermined. It's to slow down the process of building this the separate European security framework or defense framework where they can take care of their own security. Then the reliance on the US security guarantees, and that is also sort of an important aspect that the Europeans now started feeling that the post-Ukraine and the post-Trump, thanks to post-Trump, that we wanted to reduce the reliance with the European on the European the US security guarantees. And last week we have seen the news from the NATO coming out that in all these joint force command JFCs have been taken over by the European countries, the European allies, members of the NATO, from the American military leadership. So the top military leadership, the command leadership, the NATO command and control structure. I remember when I went to shape the strategic headquarters right for Aero, my observation was that while interacting with the staffs there, in fact, I was the first scholar from a non-NATO member countries. They were anticipating that an Indian scholar would be interested in studying NATO. I found the leadership is completely by the Americans on the French, the Brits, both of them. The rest of the staffs and all from the other countries like Poland and Germany and other members. Germany is not even in the command and control in terms of the military leadership. Nowhere in the scene. So it is all the British officers and mostly the strategic level, the all American officers, being Air Force officers, being managing. Maybe now things might have been different, but the point is that the command and control structure is dominated by the US military leadership. Now, the last week, the statement, which also indicates that this point that they are trying to fill this gap, address this fault line of how to reduce our reliance on the US security guarantees and US role in the NATO. With the Trump threatening to take over Greenland, which is also an open war against NATO. So the Putin welcomed the step. We will support that if that happens. The another aspect which I see from the developments for the last 4 years, there's a gradual again the superpower, I would say the superpower between the US and Putin, maybe that's what it has it to shift this the strategic competition you call or the study for power and strategy competition from the Europe to Arctic. So that is what the Greenland happens without any attribute to the Russia's militarization of the Arctic region, the revival of the Murmansk port, Murmansk city, the military assets, building more military assets by the Americans. I find it was so strange when Trump saying that taking over the Greenland, without sort of any sort of reference to the Russia's militarization also with the Chinese. Both Russia and China and this militarization of the Arctic area, and also the opening of the trade routes and dominating the space. And internal institutional fragmentation, that's why we discuss is that's also going to threaten these huge provisions. So the fault lines, these additional fault lines, the war in Ukraine, of course, that I will discuss in detail, the critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. This is also important fault line that Europe has to address this factor, and already they are working on it, and they have already been attacked by the Russia's the so-called the gray zone war or the cognitive warfare they've been involved in. So this is another new hybrid situation, and also reliance on the non-EU technology, including the Chinese and also US that we'll discuss. And the ideological split when it comes to the migration and climate security within the Europe. So this is all the internal fault lines that Europe is facing now, and that is also affecting the European security architecture, making collective decisions or building a consensus when it comes to European security, how to secure Europe and form a coherent security policy or defense policy by the Europeans and for the Europe. So the war in Ukraine, so Putin is very interesting figure. We don't know what his objective in Ukraine. So far, he hasn't shown. Initially, it was thought he's going to capture one city after the other city, and eventually he's going to take over the entire Ukraine. Or then there are some strategic areas that he's going to retain and hold it and using as a bargain. What I find is in the large scheme of things that Putin, in the longer run, he is very clear that he wants to break this NATO, the security architecture. And I find that Trump is also sort of complementing his role in terms of breaking NATO's the European allies from the breakup from European allies, and that would put the European allies into sort of a catch-22 situation, whether to leave the NATO or take over the NATO or what to do with the NATO. The unexpected things, the Finland and Sweden joining NATO. Can I have times? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? 5 minutes, I'll finish it quickly. The unexpected, and it is also another setback for the Putin's calculation, is this the Sweden and Finland joining NATO. This is where I had my own doubt that it is no longer only the European security, but it's a sort of a gradual shifting of the geopolitics from Europe to the Arctic. Finland now, Russia is now sharing the longest border with the NATO countries. Earlier it was only the Baltic states. Now it is an extended. It's like you opened your frontiers to your NATO enemies. Military, if you say military from the military point of view. Critical infrastructure, and this map depicts that ever since this war was broke, I mean, and also much before that, from last 7 years, how the Russia has involved in a hybrid warfare, attacking on this critical infrastructure in Europe, mostly on this energy and communications and undersea cables. And there are several incidents being reported, especially in the Baltic Seas, cutting off those data lines between Finland and Estonia, Sweden, and that is also undermined. So Russia can black out Europe at any time. Now these cables, the communication cables, where the 97% of international communication are sent through subsea cables. We all know that. So that's going to cost, have a huge economic cost, financial cost to the European countries. On the other hand, Europe is also facing the reducing its reliance on the American technology that we discussed. The non-EU technology, where this EU president has announced that European Union plans to phase out American tech. All big tech companies almost controls 90%, 70 to 80% of the European market in terms of cloud storage, all these business operations. This is the biggest challenge. One way, on the other east, you are having this Russia's threat to the critical infrastructure, and from the west, you are facing the monopolizing or the control of the technology reliance with the West. So both can serve as a leverage, and that is the biggest challenge for the European countries to address. So Europe has become a sort of caught between sandwiched between the two strategic rivalries. It's not an actual rivalry. The old Chinese proverb says that when two elephants fight, it is the grass gets crushed. Now there is no rivalry between the Putin and Trump. There's an absolute personal bonhomie between Putin and Trump. Otherwise, can you imagine in a situation where there is a Russia-Ukraine war and NATO has been threatened, but yet the American president Trump has invited Putin for a dialogue, and they had a very good public display of bonhomie, which is it's like it's so to stay and for any thinkers. And that also caused concerns of the European leadership. They don't want to see at least the optics. So these are optics. This means, imagine the next day morning, all the European cities, the newspapers carry Trump and Putin shaking hands. At the same time, the Europeans are sending supplies and money, arms and ammunition, paying for the taxpayers' monies to. What would the public reaction to this? Their leadership. It undermines the credibility. So this is a snapshot of that, how Europe is sort of completely their economy is being totally relying on the non-Europe technologies, especially in the US and China. For instance, I'll give you this one important. Angela Merkel has shut down the nuclear reactors in Germany. That's so the pressure from the Green Party for the alliance that she sacrificed this infrastructure nuclear reactors. Had they ever nuclear reactors, they would have been at least self-sufficient in terms of the energy supply. When a situation like the Russia-Ukraine war, and they had to snap the buying oil from Russia. Because you can't say that India should not buy oil from Russia, but yet you import oil from Russia and gas from Russia. Ideological the split is mainly due to the European policy, migration policy, and also the respective individual states not able to cope up. I mean, adopt that framework and implement the framework due to the domestic pressure, and that is also sort of given the rise of the right-wing populism and the rise of right-wing populism and sense of nationalism, the us versus the others, the Europeans versus non-Europeans. So this is again a sort of socio-economic challenge for the European countries. So how Europe would defend in case of a sort of any sort of war from Russia? Maybe there are predictions saying that the next move would be Russia if Putin feels that he's losing the war in Ukraine, he's not getting any sort of deal, which is like more satisfying deal, he would provoke the Europeans through Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They are new members joined 2004. I'm sure that the old members, the founding members of NATO, especially the Western European countries, I don't think so they will be able to upfront. It is actually they are left with no option to invoke the Article 5, the commitment. So they feel they would feel that they are being trapped, unnecessarily trapped into this war, which they don't want. There won't be, I don't think so there will be any domestic support for this. And these are the active ground forces being deployed between the Russian force, Russia and Belarus. And if you see do a rough calculation about then how the Russia in terms of outnumber, minus the if you minus the West European countries, in case like Spain may not want to join, maybe Germany would also avoid this sort of war in case of, because it is not their land being attacked. So NATO commitment, it is actually beginning the NATO. So if now Putin has a age, to me as a strategic expert, here an age, if he wants to break the NATO, if he moves 1 inch, some sort of already it's been there, their airspace been violated. Many occasions there are a lot of incidents that Putin's Russian aircraft, drones been the airspace been violated, but it did not provoke to a scale of war. But there are possibilities in a scenario, and that would actually end up put a big challenge for the NATO. So the European members for the first time they have now realized that we need to spend on the defense and security. They are ramping up their defense spending, and that is one of the core element of EU-India Free Trade Agreement is for the defense cooperation, and also looking for delinking the supply chain, the industrial reliance from China. So that has geopolitical these dynamics post EU-India Free Trade Agreement, which was stalled for last 16 years. Now, European Union, Indian side from India also it is a sort of a awakening moment, I would say. Rather, our bureaucracy tend to see, this is my analysis. If you see the EU-India summit for the past, from last 20 years, we are very comfortable negotiating with the individual European Union countries rather than EU as a framework. We tend to see EU as a sort of a trade bloc, economic bloc, and some of the standards and some of the policies were sort of detrimental to our own trade issues. So we find it easy and comfortable to deal with the individual European country states. But now that thing has changed. So the current battlefield situation is this, where the deployment and so now from this figure, if you see, if Russia has to, it's an analysis, has to take over the Ukraine, it would take almost another 20-30 years. The kind of the pace of movement they are there's not much progress from their side. There's a strong resistance from Ukraine as well. And there is a support from all the European countries, including NATO members, in terms of funds to fight the war and support the resistance of the Ukraine resistance. And Russia knew that. And this is what I mean. I feel that the Putin's ultimate aim or the goal was to not to capture the land. Whatever he has gained, it is more than sufficient. Big achievement for the Russian leadership. But ultimate aim is to break the NATO and destroy the NATO as a security framework for the Europe. And that's why his overtures that we can do trade with Europe, I can have a dialogue with European countries. They are not my enemies. All these things, the posturing is also indicates that break the NATO so that NATO will not only to expand towards eastwards, but also it weakens this European security and defense framework. European Union, even if they build, there will be only one nuclear weapon state, which is France. So the new front of battle is the eastern borders that also affected the eastern member states, such as the Poland, which is really affected, which is also currently holding the presidency, EU presidency, and also one of the having maintain the sustainable economy. Its GDP is as compared to the other European countries. It maintains the economic growth, and it also followed a different policies when it comes to migration. I hope I did not switch off, no? No. So the ultimate question is, if you want to pursue the goal of having its own independent army and independent security framework, given the last few years of the challenges that NATO is facing and the American leadership in the NATO and the Trump's behavior, the survey indicates that if you could see that the highest population, like East European countries and West European countries, they feel that they should have a unified armed forces. And there are also there are efforts to build a new army headquarters in the outskirts of Brussels, where NATO headquarters is also established. And in terms of defense, the countries also expressed that whether what would be the better to defend their countries, the European Union. So most of them have expressed the European Union will be the better able to defend themselves than to rely on the NATO or NATO expansion. So now the Ukraine's membership to European Union is also questionable. I mean, I don't know whether they will get a European Union membership. So option with the European countries, this is an analytical tool from the EPRS, European Public Research Studies, that I think this Europeans mostly they have left no option to cooperate with the Russia. And this is going to happen in the longer run. The European NATO, they slowly take over the leadership role of the NATO command and structure. However, the periphery, again, you think from this geopolitical point of view, the mainland or the land forces, the land command and control structure will be going to, taken over by the European allies military leadership, whereas the periphery, the sea or the rimland, you can say that will be with the Americans, the US leadership under the NATO command. Because we have Turkey. We not forget Turkey is also part non-European member of the NATO member countries. And simultaneously, the parallel process to see that how we can cooperate on the building their own independent forces, European security framework forces, because it will be duplicate their entire thing. You can't spend 2% of GDP to NATO as well as some sort of a percentage to your own building, or either you have to spend for the European Union or you have to spend for the NATO. And the question is, if you build a European Union, you army or you defense union, who's going to take the lead? If it is a collective leadership, or who is going to take the leadership? And that's the countries has to come together and work towards it. And who is going to share the nuclear assets in terms of eventuality? For instance, that's now that there's a two front. One is what if Greenland is attacked? How the European Union is going to tackle that? Almost 60% of the arms coming from the American companies. So that's the biggest challenge and biggest scenario. So I end here. Thank you so much. I hope I have finished on time.